Welcome to Prose Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Hello and welcome to the Prose and Cons Precipice Fiction podcast. I hope I got that right. Today, we thought we would talk about stories within stories. So, that can be any form of that, maybe a dream sequence, maybe a fever dream. Apparently those are different things. Perhaps the epistolary novel in which you see the, two conversants communicating via letters. That might be one thing. Or maybe just someone telling a story within it. And we're just going to basically talk about that and talk about our experience with it and what we've thought of it. So, but before that, of course, I have to introduce our guests. Number one, we have Paddy Boylan.
Hello.
And we have Matan Elal, I believe for the second time. Is this your second time on the...
It is my second time, and I liked how you said that you have to introduce us. I like that. You do have to introduce us.
I have no choice.
Although I guess
you are obligated.
well.
I am compelled. I am divinely compelled to introduce both of you.
I'm happy we are on the same page.
So what have we been reading, playing, listening to? What's been happening, Paddy?
Well, Alex, I've been reading Moby Dick. This is going to be an ongoing joke at this point. I think like every single episode I'm going to say, I'm reading Moby Dick. I'm reading Moby Dick. It's really long. I don't want to say I'm not enjoying it. I am. When it's good, it's like, wow, that's profound. But
it's like a very nice way to break up with someone. Like, I'm not saying I'm not enjoying this relationship. It's just long and excruciating.
When you tell stories, they're just way too long and they don't go anywhere. It's really good, but like I feel like some judicious editing might have done it good.
Yeah.
That's probably sacrilegious to say at this point because Moby Dick is like in canon now, but it is what it is. I'm also playing Elden Ring, which wow. Yeah, there can't be more than like 100, 200 lines of written dialogue altogether. So you could say as a piece of writing, it's not great, but talk about a masterclass in atmosphere. The sense of mystery and loneliness and something really bad has happened in this world just before you get there, but you don't know what it is amazing. Yeah, the atmosphere they've created is it's unbelievable. So yeah, that's what I've been enjoying.
Awesome. That sounds like man. If I got into that, I feel like I'm playing Breath of the Wild right now, and that's taking a lot of time. But if I got into Elden Ring,
fortunately, it's punishingly difficult, so you can't play it for more than half an hour without tearing out your hair and sweating all your bodily fluids out.
Seeing a therapist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. What about you, Matan? What have you been reading?
Well, I tried Dark Souls 2 for exactly 12 minutes, and then reconsidered my life decisions. And like, I don't have enough free time.
It's meant to be harder as well. So
yeah.
It's so
hard. Okay, and about reading, about the fun stuff. Well, I'm not sure if I said it the last time I was here, but I'm still going through A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens.
Oh, right.
I do these little tangents where I go read something else and I usually finish it and then I go back to A Tale of Two Cities. It's okay. I don't want to sound like a hypocrite after like ripping on your Moby Dick experience, but it is dense. I am enjoying it. It is wonderfully written.
Pacing was just
but
different
it is like
before the 20th century, I think.
Exactly. The pacing is different. 200 years old English. But great, like super great.
Yeah, episodic TV shows has ruined us for life.
Yeah,
I know, right? Guys, if anyone listening to this, if you're scared of the old books, don't be scared. Just make sure you got 7 months free and go ahead.
That's it.
How long is it in? Oh, sorry, Alex. How many pages is Tales of Two Cities?
I'm embarrassed to say it's not very thick. It's just it's quality, it's content, it's density. It's not cool. Yeah,
density.
Well, to follow along with that theme, I have recently started reading this Thomas Hardy's Return of the Native, which I found in a shop. Yeah, dense is a good word. It's been about 22 pages, and so far all that's happened is a guy's been like, it spends like five pages talking about just the nature, and then like it sort of zooms into a bloke just walking along, and an old bloke meets this guy, and then he's like, "Oh, hey, how's it going? Seems like you've got a woman in the back of your car there. Can I see her?" And the guy's like, "Nope." And the old guy's like, "Okay, see ya." And that's about it. That's 20 pages.
That's good drama. That's just good drama.
Look, it isn't. It is. Yeah, it's well written. It's enjoyable. There's a lot of, very. Is it Keats who's the one who was very into nature, or Yeats? I don't know. Someone's going to castigate me for that. But a lot of really beautiful imagery, but glacially slow. Glacially slow. It even says it's talking about the nature, and it's like it has the sense of something that's died. Like everything that happens on this moor is so slow that it's sort of mirrors that a little bit.
So this has just been us ragging on books written in the days of yore.
And that's it. Thanks for
like absolute Philistines.
Come back next week when we shit on Dante's Inferno.
We do read the modern books, if anyone was wondering. Just not at the moment, I guess.
No.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also reading Rules of Attraction by Bret Easton Ellis, which is paced much more quickly, but it's got its own things going on. I'll talk about that later. Cool. But yeah, what I did want to discuss today, what we decided we would discuss, was stories within stories. This is sort of a theme that I'm really pretty excited to talk about, because I feel like fiction basically is fairly static in terms of story blocks, in terms of the things it puts together. You have the introduction, you have the what do they call it? The event that changes things, that breaks the stasis. You've got the status quo just before that. But you have these little things that are injected that almost feel like the author's just kind of like, hey, look, you've been really good just paying attention to this story that's just trucking along. So I'm going to give you a little bit of candy. I'm going to give you a little bit of juiciness here. And I feel like a lot of the time that's where you get these weird little inserts like fever dreams or dream sequences or just abstract sort of things. And yeah, I was specifically really, really excited to talk about that sort of stuff today. So I don't know, why don't we start with you, Matan? Can you think of any specific examples?
Let's call it what it is. It is fiction within fiction. And
Stories
I was wondering how long into the podcast until someone drops the Inception reference.
I have a note right here to talk about Inception.
Yeah, exactly. Like it is a dream inside a dream. It's a fiction inside fiction. It's a rabbit hole that can go as deep as you let it. I mean, we have one story within a story that goes insanely deep, literally nonstop. I'm going to save that one for later. I'm going to start with, first of all, why do we want a story within a story? I think Alex explained it great. One example I liked when I was a kid was Watership Down. When you got these rabbits, you got their story. There's a good show on Netflix right now. If anyone's never read it, please read it. The thing is, the story within the story, it can be immersive. The one there is about the folk hero, the rabbit with 1,000 enemies, El Harira, they call him. And they just use his stories for lessons, motivation, and they just kind of intersperse them within the greater story. And I think that the best service this tool, this whole technique adds to the story is it makes you feel like anything in the frame is slightly more realistic, because you are standing with these rabbits and listening to the story. That it makes them feel a little more real, if that makes sense. Because I listen to stories. Yeah.
Like it's almost like you are there with them listening to this story.
Exactly. By pushing them out, you're basically closing the gap between them and you.
Yeah, that's true. I'd never thought of it that way, actually. You're bringing them into your own, or you are being brought into your own thing. You're sitting around the campfire listening to this story with them. You're, in a sense, becoming a character within the story, because
you're becoming a rabbit.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like using negative space to do that, because because you've literally taken the characters out of the story by going into something else. And in doing that, you've inserted yourself into that place. So that's a really fascinating and profound epiphany you've got there, Tom. I think that's really cool. Like, I've never thought about it.
It is. I hadn't thought about it either, and it can do that when done well. When done poorly, I mean, I think everyone has read a story and you're really enjoying it, and suddenly the old wise guide character wants to start telling a tale, and you're like, well, hang on, we were just following this story which we're really enjoying, and now you want to put that down and start another story about characters I'm not invested in, and it can be annoying.
Yeah,
not always.
You have to know about the troll 3,000 years ago that built the village where we,
sometimes there's an easier, I feel like a lot of the time the embedded story is the writer wanting to push a metaphor. They want to give us a metaphor for something. The tale about the old man is about to tell is metaphor for the state of the kingdom. And that's great, but authors there's a bit of a trap, I think, where they want to be poets and really poetical and get deep and investigate metaphysics, and sometimes it can really just throw a wrench in the pace of the tale. Looking at you, dream sequences.
A bit of a cop-out.
I was going to say,
I don't know about maybe a cop-out. I mean, it's.
I feel like it can be a cop-out. Like I feel it with dream sequences, especially like, I want to tell them that a danger is coming. But rather than put it in details in a dialogue scene, I'm just going to have the main character dream about a flood and wake up sweating. And that way I'll let them know that something scary is coming.
You gave me a lot of good feedback on this thing that I'm writing at the moment, which I've talked about before. I've read a little bit about a podcast. I jammed a whole lot of dream sequences in it before really thinking about it. I think you said something along the lines of, I just want to know what happens in the plot. Like, this is not the plot. You said it in a much nicer way.
Story.
That's it, because there's no stakes.
There's no stakes.
Yeah. That's what I was saying last week. She's like, because there's no stakes in this, because it's not directly tied to the plot, we're no longer invested in it. Because we're not invested in it for the sake of itself. Like, the character in this is removed from where they are. They're in a sense like a fictional, like, meta character, and it's like, oh no, he got stabbed, but then he woke up. So it's like, oh, so everything that you just read to me there just is completely meaningless, is what you're saying to me. And we inherently know that when we start reading it. So unless it is, I think that the key is, unless it's engaging for its own sake, as opposed to be just like, hey, let me like show you this really cool thing. The audience is naturally going to sort of just go like, yeah, I guess this is a thing, cool, whatever. But then, like, can I hear about him like escaping from the wolf, like what you were just doing a minute ago?
So what justifies this story within the story?
Yeah. I think, as I just said, I think it's it being engaging for its own sake. So we've got a whole new story, and it's not impossible to do, because let's be fair, a short story has to pull this up from the ground up when it's starting, right? It has to be like, bam, I'm in there, I'm figuring it out. These characters or whatever, whatever's happening has to be pulling me in. So it's really just doing that within the context of a novel. Now, is that harder within the context of a novel? I don't know. Maybe we have to talk about that.
But the way you say it is like, if it's interesting, it's fine. So let's do a bit of a metaphor ourselves. Let's say I went to a sushi restaurant because I love sushi. And in the middle of the sushi dinner, the chef says, hey, let's stop for 5 minutes and have a hot dog. I heard you like hot dogs too. And I'm like, yeah, I like hot dogs, but I'm here for the sushi. But you like hot dogs. I've seen you have a hot dog last night. Well, yeah, but right now, I'd like to have my sashimi in peace. So how about you keep your hot dog? So that's my counter argument to, if it's interesting, it has a role within the story. I think the role has to be more than just entertainment.
If he brings out the hot dogs and the sashimi hot dogs.
Yeah, I would agree.
Well, okay, sashimi hot dogs, you should go to jail for that, but I guess that you could kind of sashimi.
I don't know, maybe you should try.
Well, okay, what if it, I don't know how much further I can stretch this metaphor, to be honest with you. But what if they're like little embedded sushi hot dogs within a greater sushi thing,
Like the sushi pretending to be a hot dog, or a hot dog pretending to be sushi?
My clumsy point was
really don't know.
Like we were saying, it sounds like I was ragging on embedded stories, but if they really are tied intrinsically to the main story, and if they're adding something to it that couldn't otherwise be added, that's when it has value, I think.
But what is it that they are adding, do you think, that gives that value? Because as we've said, if your point is to say, hey, there's a flood happening, or there's a disaster happening, and I'm going to display this by the main character dreaming about a flood and like waking up sweating, that is the author going like, hey, look, this is a thing that's happening that I'm giving you a hint about, and maybe is actively helping the character. But at that point, I mean, is that scenario in and of itself problematic and just not good, or is it in the way it's written and how effective that is?
I think in a line, the story within a story has to have consequences on the progression of the other story, and it has to tell us something that we didn't know. I'll give you one example. In the Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, actually not in the Way of Kings, in the subsequent book, there's the main character. No, that's Rothfuss. But anyway, there's this main character, and we keep having her flashbacks while seeing her character progression. And it is in her flashbacks that we discover towards the climax that she murdered her own father. And we are given that information just in the right time so that it would prepare us for something that she does. So the author chose to give the flashbacks, to stretch them out in like 2 plot lines that go side by side, and they each reveal about the character. So I mean, if the story within a story tells us something we didn't know about the present, I think that's amazing. But if everyone involved in that story within a story lived 1,000 years ago are no longer relevant, then we got to question its necessity to the book.
So it needs direct bearing on the plot as it's going forward, you think?
Exactly, on unsolved stakes, on existing stakes.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think I want to just dive in and talk about some examples of stories within stories that I love. Like my personal favorite story within a story, I read this on a plane once, listening to music and like really creepy electronic music, and it was just the most awesome experience. It's, in my opinion, the definitive version of the epistolary story, as in the story told by letters. I just love saying the word epistolary because no one ever knows what it means and it makes me sound smart. But it is the beginning of Dracula, the first diary entries with Jonathan Harker, where I've read Dracula and the rest of it's a good book, but like you can tell this guy got his start, really cut his teeth writing short stories because it is so tight, and the build of tension and the dread as it goes on through is so intriguing and so like just creepy and things.
So
yeah.
Alex, just for the sake of our listeners who have not come face to face with the original Dracula, could you describe to us the format of the book? Because it's very interesting.
So look, this book was written like 200 years ago now, so lol, sorry if there's spoilers. But basically what happens is a man is writing letters to his sweetheart, and he's basically explaining how he came to this castle, and he's just kind of, he's knocked on the door. I forget exactly how he wound up there, but he's been drawn to this castle. He's knocked on the door. Some creepy butler has let him in. He's led him up to his room, and basically he's met the master of the house, who is this decrepit, smelly, disgusting-looking old man who is basically inviting him into his house, and he's like, "This guy's creepy. I'm going to stay here one night, and then I'll get the fuck out."
And it's all letters. Everything you get to know in the story
are written as letters.
In the format of a letter.
Yes. So he's written them all as like, "Hey, I'm here now. This is what." And as it goes on, it reveals within these letters that more and more eerie, creepy things are happening. There's weird like basically the guy's like, look, don't try and find your way around the house. It's really, really big and really hard to find your way around. The guy seems to be getting younger as it goes on. This is the old man. He seems to be getting younger, which is really freaking this guy out. He like discovers these like sort of vampire harpy ghost sort of things. That he sort of shuts the door. All these weird things that happen, and it builds to this climax of like basically. Sooner or later, he's just like, yo, I want out. To the old man, he's like, I gotta go. I can't stay here anymore. And the old man's like, hey, you're free to go anytime you want. And he opens the door, and the most terrifying part of this story is, and I'm aware of the irony of me telling a story within a story about a podcast about telling stories about stories, but he opens the door, and you see this whole pack of wolves, and they're just like looking at him hungry, and like Dracula, because it's Dracula, is like, you can go anytime you want. And that's pretty much where it finishes. And it's just like, oh, it's so spooky. And then from there, it goes on, and we discover that Jonathan Harker's making his way back to it. And but just that by itself, if you cut that off, would have been like one of the finest horror short stories of the 19th century. I'm going to say 19th century, for my money. So that's...
I think it is 19th.
Yeah. And aside from being a really good short story in and of itself, it's also, it ties very strongly into the rest of the novel, which sort of takes a bit of a different tone, different pace. It's in London. I won't bother going into that. But it has very direct bearings on the plot. And I believe they use his letters to work out how to defeat the Dracula in the end. So, yeah, that's an example of a really effective use of a
It's a great one.
Yeah.
Good example, Alex.
I accidentally mentioned Patrick Rothfuss before, and I didn't mean to, but Patrick Rothfuss's work, which is called
The Name of the Wind.
Name of the Wind.
Only the best book ever. Sorry.
It's really, really good. Story within a story. Story is really good. Story is being told by an innkeeper. Story keeps cutting back to the innkeeper and the present day. And both stories are really gripping. And it works really well. When you're involved in the innkeeper's long tale, we're forgetting that we're actually being told this story, and it cuts back. I'm like, oh, yeah,
he's still here.
Told a story. yeah. It works really well. Is there a name for that format where you've got the narrator, but the narrator is actually a named character who exists in their own world?
Well, you got the unreliable narrator thing, where you are being told a story by a character. And
but unreliable narrator is you're being told by a character, but also you've got reason to doubt the story, which I don't think is the case in Name of the Wind.
Or is it?
Or is it, says Matan?
Yeah, he does talk himself up a lot.
But he's also a mythical character, so he's really just going like, hey, this is kind of how it went down. I just wanted to dispel all the rumors and things. But I don't know, I call that like raconteuring, I guess. Like raconteur is like a storyteller. So I guess that's, I don't know if there's an actual technical term for it, but that is it's actually surprisingly a fairly unique format. I can't really think of many other books that are like that cut back and forth so consistently between these two narrative tellings. I haven't finished it either, so I don't really know how it goes, but that's a pretty good example. What about The Matrix? What do we think of that in terms of a story within a story? Does that count? Because it's like, I feel like I might be stretching, like pushing the envelope a little bit there, but I mean, essentially you've got this...
I mean...
Or is that just parallel worlds?
I do feel like it's more like parallel worlds, because it is the same story that takes place over multiple, what do you want to call it, platforms, dimensions, states of consciousness.
But we could make the same argument about Inception, although there are little mini narratives to each dream.
Oh, yes.
Mini narratives, but they've all got their own kind of...
Inception is like Christopher Nolan sitting in a room with his brother, Jonathan, who helps him write most of his movies, and basically saying, how do we bend their brain as much as possible?
Yeah, it worked.
How do we make them feel confused?
I mean,
shout out to Interstellar.
Yeah,
I haven't seen it. Really want to.
That or Dark Knight, I think, are my favorite Nolan films. I think probably Dark Knight takes the cake, to be honest, just because of Heath Ledger's performance. But yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't know whether you could technically call it that because what's the action is actually going on the whole time. Like when they're in the dream, that's not actually a separation of it, because these are the same characters going through the same things. There are like live consequences. It goes like if they die in the dream, I believe they die in real life. So I don't know if that technically counts in the same way that the Matrix does. Not to get super technical on it.
I don't think the
but-
Matrix does count.
Can I drop
that's what I'm
a
saying.
suggestion?
Either of them count. Say again.
Can I drop a suggestion?
Of course.
So actually, what if we just, I mean, I'm assuming that someone's listening to this and thinking, oh, I'm writing a novel. I would like to have a story within a story. So I was wondering, and I don't mind starting, if you each have like a do and don't when it comes to story within a story in your novel, like something you think is like problematic. A lot of writers make that error when they write a story within a story, like stakes, we said, for example, and something that you do think work. You can just use something from your example. For example, in Watership Down, the story within the story is usually pretty short and tries to teach them how to deal with a problem that they're facing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, I would say in the case of Dracula, the novel actually begins with that. Like it starts with the diary entries. So in a sense, we're already invested in it. So even if that finished up and was just complete by itself, we could almost just accept that as the novel. And to be honest, once it went into the actual novel, I started to lose interest a little bit. Maybe that's just my short attention span, but I found the novel entries of that, the diary entries of that, to be much more engaging, just because it's very tight.
So it started with it. You think that's something good?
Started with it, and it framed the rest of the novel. It was like, hey, I can keep doing this for as long as I want because this is the story as far as you can tell. And then it went into something else from there.
Was there ever a story within a story that kind of, took you out of it and you maybe even dropped the book?
Story within a story. What I can think of, all I can assume is just. Oh, actually, no. I will say one. I didn't drop it, but me and Patty have directly differing views about this, and I know you, Patty. You know exactly.
I'm curious. I actually don't.
No, I've brought this up before. But there's a book by Philip K. Dick called "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep," and it was made into a really good film called Blade Runner, which I'm sure you guys have all seen.
Four films, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're talking about the original. I
just got that.
In my opinion, Blade Runner the film is superior to the book, the original book, because there's this long, repeated sequence in which I can't remember exactly what happens, but basically a guy.
Unicorn, right?
What's that?
No, about his dreams. Like, is he a robot?
No, that does happen. Android Dream Electric Sheep. There's this whole sort of religious vision thing that's happening throughout.
So
it's
now
very
I'm curious,
weird.
Alex. What are you? What are you talking about?
So basically, the guy in like one of the protagonists in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the novel, not the movie, has these recurring religious visions, and it's him climbing up a mountain. And when I read him, I was just like, I don't really care about this. I'm not invested in it. The movie took that out and actually changed the ending fairly significantly. And I thought the story was better for it. It's one of the very few times when I think the film was actually better than the book. I can't actually think of any other time when I think that. But yeah, that would be an example of something that didn't work for me. I know Patty has other opinions about it, but yeah.
It did work for me because the point of Androids Dream of Electric Sheep was as a metaphysical, philosophical exploration. And I know I was ragging on authors bringing metaphysics into books before, but it does it really well. You get so much uncertainty about the world and the character's place in it, and there's this feeling of like sort of malevolence behind everything that the dream gives you a glimpse of and never fully explains. And it almost adds this kind of like haunting sense of like dread and ill ease with reality that permeates the whole book because of it. And it does it, I don't know, I think it does it really well.
I'm glad that we have two opinions on this, because I'm guessing it's like some dream sequence works for some don't. I would just say that, especially when it's about flashbacks, if we go into flashbacks for a second, away from dreams, you shouldn't give the flashback of a character before you made your reader care about that character. I was just asking really Alex earlier, like, did you ever drop a book because of a flashback? I did. It was a book about this half goblin boy. You probably heard this story a million times. He's in a village, everybody hates him. He discovers that his goblin father is actually some sort of important figure in goblinhood, and decides to go find his destiny. So far, I'm with you. I'm okay. The writing's fine. The goblin thing, okay. But then he goes out and he meets this girl in the woods, and we immediately go on like a 20+ tangent about how she got there. And I'm like, we're on page 110. I do not know this girl, and I'm not interested in going on a 20-page tangent on how she got there.
Sounds like you're not even sold on whether or not you want to return to the original story before the other one begins.
It was a library book. It was in a library phase of my life. I just kept it, and I may have not returned it. I don't remember, but it was in Australia, a library book in Australia. Alex, maybe you could return it for me.
I will do my best.
Yeah. So hold on to your flashbacks, people. Do not give your flashback too early. You do not introduce a character and immediately send us into a flashback.
Hang on, because it sounds to me like an issue that you took with that was just that this thing was so long. Like, if it had been 5 pages, do you think maybe you would have been okay with it, and then they directly tied it back into it?
I don't know. I mean, if you want to tell me about the character, show me something he does right now. Why do you need to? Like, he tried to show us that she's a caring person who went through some crap. But are you not able to do that through dialogue, through actions, through scars, through behavior? You can make her skittish. You can make her do something nice.
For sure.
But instead, you choose the easy way out of telling me, oh, she used to be a maid for this really bad guy.
The telling versus showing problem, right? That age-old problem of explaining things that you could very definitely suggest to the audience instead. I got one. Make it relevant. Make sure it's relevant, even if that relevancy pays off later down the line. And I think with Android's Dream Electric Sheep, it did. I don't remember how. And if we're being honest, no one understands Philip K. Dick's books.
Philip K. Dick.
But
are you trying to imply that Ubik is not complicated? Sorry, go on.
No, Ubik, of course, makes perfect sense the whole way through.
Absolutely.
It's about...
what is Ubik? Okay, never mind, go.
What is Ubik? It needs to be tied intrinsically to the plot, the story, the vibe of the story. Make it relevant. Like, question, why am I telling them this? Why? Always be asking why. I got a question for you guys. Have you ever seen a story within a story within a story? And I was thinking about this the other day, and I'd like to try writing something that gets away with embedding, and seeing how many embeds you can do. Probably not many. Yeah, exactly. Probably not many before it gets exciting.
Let's see if we can invent that right now. So let's see. There's a group of 3 guys, and they're having a conversation about stories. And one guy goes, okay, well, I got a story for you. There's a guy, and he's going to the shop, but on the way to the shop, he meets this old man, and the old man goes, whoa, Sonny, now hang on there, because I know you're going to that shop, but there's something about that shop you need to know. And the old man starts telling him a story about what happened when he was much younger. And then the little boy, when he's much younger, goes off and discovers someone, and someone else tells him. So I think you could do that pretty feasibly. I don't know how long it would take to start.
There's a listener out there screaming Arabian Nights into his headphones. But okay.
Speaking of which, that sounds like a good segue for what we're going to read today. And breaking from tradition, we're not actually going to read from our own work, because all of us were too cowardly to show any of that this session, which is fine. But we thought we would read from one of the classic stories, some would argue the definitive story within a story, a The 1001 Nights. So Matan is going to read a snippet of one of the stories, but
Snippets.
you're going to give us a little bit of context first, won't you?
So this really, really goes into what Patty just discussed. Like, can you have a story within a story within a story and all that stuff? And Alex was just talking about it. Arabian Nights basically gets away with non-stop tangents. It goes from, I cannot even describe it. Imagine that you open the door and then you walk into a hallway and you took another door and then another hallway and another door. Arabian Nights is just insane like that. I could just gush over it for an hour, so I'm going to stop myself. Basically, little known fact, Arabian Nights was first compiled in France. It was compiled by a European guy. Most of the time when you even see the book, it will even, yeah, it was first compiled in France. And there's no escaping the European influence on it.
Dude, I'm looking this
allegedly,
up. That inherently sounds
this
wrong
white
to me.
European guy
but
went to the Mediterranean. He collected these stories. He came back with them, and he told all these people in Europe, like, "Hey, check out these crazy stories from Arabia." Basically, he got this frame.
Arabia was like the Mediterranean?
No, just a region. Let's call it a region.
Okay.
I'm doing injustice to some geographical terms here. But you got this story, and it starts like this. A long time ago, there was this Sassanid king or Saranid king or Persian king. It depends on where you heard this story. And he had a bit of a problem. He heard that his brother's wife was being unfaithful, and in that culture, that's about as worst thing you can do is be unfaithful, and he's super angry, and he thinks, man, imagine if my wife did it. So obviously he goes home and he finds his wife with no less than 3 men, I believe. This guy, this all-powerful king, he just executes her on the spot. And then being so angry and filled with rage, he decides that all women are equally to blame for what his wife did, and he starts this terrible tradition. Every night, this guy takes a virgin, he deflowers her, and then he executes her the next morning, swearing that he will never be with a woman who has been with anyone else, nor will that woman will be with anyone else after him. And that's kind of the setting to the story. And the unfortunate guy who's in charge of delivering him virgins is his vizier, his minister in Arabian culture. And basically this goes on and on and on until one day the vizier simply runs out of virgins. What he does is he tells his daughter about the situation, and his daughter tells him, let me marry this guy. Without further ado, the guy, he just tells her a story to explain why she shouldn't do that. So that's the story I'm going to read today, which happens to be the first story told in Arabian Nights. Okay. Just gonna.
Cool.
So he tells her basically, you're not to risk your life. She insisted it had to be done, but he objected. And he tells her this, I'm afraid that you may experience what happened to the donkey and the bull with the merchant. What was that? His daughter asked. And what happened to the two of them? Her father told her, and that's how the story begins. You must know, my daughter, that a certain merchant had both wealth and animals, and had been given by Almighty God a knowledge of the languages of beasts and birds. He lived in a country and had a home, a donkey, and a bull. One day the bull went to the donkey's quarters and found them swept out and sprinkled with water. There was sieved barley and straw in his throat, while the donkey was lying there at his ease. At times his master would ride him out on some errand, but he would then be taken back. One day the merchant heard the bull say to the donkey, I congratulate you. Here I am, tired out, while you are at your ease, eating sieved barley. On occasion, the master puts you to use, riding on you, but then bringing you back again, whereas I am always plowing and grinding corn. The donkey replied, when they put the yoke on your neck and want to take you out to the fields, don't get up, even if they beat you, or else get up and then lie down again. When they bring you back and put beans down for you, pretend to be sick and don't eat them. For 1, 2, or 3 days, neither eat nor drink, and you will have a rest from your hard labor. The next day, when the herdsman brought the bull his supper, the creature only ate a little. And next morning, when the men came to take the bull out to do the plowing, he found him sick and said sadly, "This was why he could not work properly yesterday." He went on to the merchant and told him, "Master, the bull is unwell and didn't eat any of his food yesterday evening." The merchant realized what had happened and said, "Go and take the donkey to do the plowing all day in his place." When the donkey came back in the evening, after having been used for plowing all day, the bull thanked him for his kindness in having given him a day's rest, to which the donkey, filled with the bitterest regret, made no reply. The next morning, the herdsman came and took him out to plow until evening. And when the donkey got back, his neck had been rubbed raw and was half dead with tiredness. When the bull saw him, he thanked him and praised him, but the donkey said, "I was sitting at my ease, but was unable to mind my own business." Then he went on, "I have some advice to give you. I heard our master say that if you don't get up, you are to be given to the butcher to be slaughtered, and your hide is to be cut into pieces. I'm afraid for you, so I've given you this advice." When the bull heard what the donkey had to say, he thanked him and said, "Tomorrow I'll go out with the men." He then finished off all his food using his tongue to lick the manger. While all this was going on, the merchant was listening to what animals were saying. The next morning, he and his wife went out and sat by the bar as the herdsman arrived and took the bull out. When the bull saw his master, he flourished his tail, farted, and galloped off, leaving the man laughing so much that he collapsed on the ground. His wife asked why, and he told her, "I was laughing because of something secret that I saw and heard, but I can't tell you or else I shall die." "Even if you do die," she insisted, "you must tell me the reason for this." He repeated that he could not do it for fear of death, but she said, "You were laughing at me." And she went on insisting until she got the better of him. In distress, he summoned his children and sent off for the Qadi and the notaries with the intention of leaving his final instructions before telling his wife the secret and then dying. What you can see here is that they just immediately go into the next story. And that's Arabian Nights. Now we're going to hear the story of the merchant telling the secret to the wife. And it just goes on like this. As a character tells a story, and within that story, another character tells a different story, and you have no idea that you've been just dragged into something different.
Right.
It's kind of brilliant.
Yeah, and does that keep going on, like, and she works out from that, oh, the point is to just keep telling stories to...
Exactly.
That's
Her name is Shahrazada. That's how she keeps herself alive, by always living this Saranid emperor, waiting to hear the point
the next story,
of the next story.
Right. Yeah, because it never really gives you a conclusion for that. Yeah.
It gives you like pseudo conclusions in the way, but it immediately goes into the next thing.
Yeah.
Having never read it, I thought each one was a self-contained story with an end.
Yeah.
And it always felt like, but that's brilliant, actually. It's the old cliffhanger thing that TV shows do now.
Yeah, that's classic.
With some of them, it feels like a Marvel after credit scene, but like, oh, and by the way, the pig knows the bull, and you should see what they're up to.
Right. Okay. So some of them like do like return to the initial thing. It's like, oh, by the way, that happened back there. But by that time, you've got another story,
something like that.
Right. That's masterful. That's really cool. Who wrote it originally, or is it
So that's the thing. It's collected stories, similar to the Grimm tales.
Right, but they were by the Brothers Grimm, weren't they, or is that just
Well, allegedly they collected ancient Germanic stories. So.
Oh, okay, right.
Allegedly.
Cool. Well, that was fascinating. I'll have to go and read the 1001 Nights now, I think. Cool. Well, I think we're getting to the tail end of it. So, Paddy, did you have a quote that you wanted to?
I do, Alex. I do. This is by Thomas Mann. From his work, Essays of 3 Decades, he was a German novelist, short story writer, social critic, philanthropist, essayist, and the 1929 Nobel Prize in Literature laureate.
an introduction. Can you
What an
introduce me like that?
What a man. Can I what, sorry?
Can you introduce me like that sometimes?
This is Matan, fabulous writer, member of Precipice Fiction, and here for the second episode only, he is going to listen to a quote by Thomas Mann, which is, "A writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people."
What does that mean? What does that
It
mean?
means that a writer is someone that labors over it. Anyone can write. Anyone can put down words on a page. But a writer is someone that goes, this isn't good enough, and needs to work and obsess and inevitably tear their hair out over writing, which is something that I think everyone who has ever written can.
So if you've ever suffered in your life, you're a writer.
This is
if you suffered,
that's
if you're in pain.
Specifically, if you do it at a writing desk.
Yeah.
That's what I take from the quote anyway. If you have any questions about it, you can direct them to Thomas Mann.
Yeah.
Is he with us? Is he alive?
I think he's dead for quite a while now.
I think he's been gone for a little.
Thomas@Mann.com.
Yeah, Thomas at Mann.com.
So if you are able to ask him questions, you got different problems to contend with.
I think so.
Many different problems. I mean, I actually have heard, this is really obscure, but I actually have heard of some schools of thought in which, like, it's not like communing with the dead. This has nothing to do with the topic, by the way. This is just an interesting little fact. I have heard of some schools of thought where, like, people will mentally do like a one-on-one like talk with someone where they're imagining talking to the person and asking the person questions, and apparently, like, after a couple of nights and weeks of doing this, the person will start to answer back, which is not really too dissimilar to what we do with writing when you really think about it, you know?
There's kind of a name for this, for what you just described.
Yeah.
I mean,
here we go.
I don't want to be the one to say that. I mean, if you talk to someone that's not there and then you start to hear the answer at some point,
powerful medium is what you mean to say.
Powerful medium, yeah, exactly.
Powerful sorcerer medium.
And yet I would ask you, Matan, have you ever had one of your characters say something that you did not expect them to say?
No, they know better.
Okay, all right. Fair enough.
That was good. That was snappy.
Okay, I think we'll probably end it there, guys, after that bizarre little tangent, which is fairly appropriate given the context of what we've just listened to. Any parting words, Mr. Podrick Boylan? Okay, Matan?
Man, thanks for having me. It's great.
Oh, thanks for coming, man. Like, I mean, I appreciate you getting up at like 6 o'clock over in Israel.
I wasn't sleeping, so.
You're just lying awake. You don't sleep, just lies awake staring at the ceiling.
When there's a podcast, I don't go to bed. I want to stay on point.
Just stay up all night, then you go. That's fine. Okay. All right. Well, we'll call it there, guys. See you later.
Bye.
You're listening to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.